Welcome, everyone. We have many participants from different organizations taking up various roles. Also, thank you for joining us on today's topic, Most Favored Nation in the Nordics. Gaining clarity in an uncertain landscape. I will be facilitating this 30-minute webinar. My name is Søren Esben Hansen, and I lead Signum's team of Human Market Insights experts. We will discuss MFN and what it means for the Nordic life science environment. I've been looking very much forward to having this presentation and conversation. MFN is a complex and fast-moving topic. And the goal today is not just to present factual information. I'm sure you know a lot already, but it is to create a space where we can explore what this actually means in practice and how you can act as companies and stakeholders. Please feel free to use the chat as we go along. I'll try to pick up on your questions and use them, either for clarification or for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So we're hoping to have 5-7 minutes at the end. However, with this many participants, we'll only have time for a few questions that I can ask Line. Before we start, let me briefly introduce our speaker. I'm joined today by Line Kantsø, who's been working with the MFN agenda for some time and brings both strategic and practical experience to this topic. Line joined Signum in January this year, thankfully, and is part of our value and access team, working with exactly these topics, these types of challenges, which are pricing, access, and how global dynamics impact local markets and also can be adapted to the Nordics. So we are in very good hands in helping us navigate this topic today. Line, I'll hand over to you with a question. So for participants who are not public affairs or market access experts, what is most important to understand about this grand buzzword, MFN?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. I think MFN, the most important thing to understand is that it's related to more than just pricing, and that you therefore need to be able to speak about this. I will not say that everyone needs to be an MFN expert, but at least you need to be able to try and open the conversation up on like, what can we do and how do we react in this new world? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will start by sharing the presentation here. And I will start by setting the scene. MFN stands for Most Favored Nation. And it is actually a very simple idea. It's about the US looking at what other countries pay for medicines and saying, we want the same price or a lower price. But let's start by looking at the problem. The US has for a very long time been paying a significantly more for medicines than other countries. And over time, that gap has become increasingly difficult to justify, both economically but also politically. And we've seen different US administrations trying to address this. So the Obama administration tried to focus on access and rebates, and the Biden administration introduced price negotiations through the IRA. But importantly, with these two administrations, were that they focused on how to change this within the US system. So the problem is not new, but the way it's being addressed is. As said previously, MFN is a simple idea that the US will not pay higher prices for drugs than other comparable countries. But what's different now is that it's no longer just a proposal. It's under the current administration, MFN is becoming combined with regulatory mechanisms and even trade tools like tariffs. So pricing is no longer just a healthcare issue, it's also a global economic and political tool. And that brings us to the most important part, because once prices are linked across countries, a local price does not stay local. That means that a price set in, for example, Denmark can potentially influence the price in the US. And that changes how companies think about pricing, launch timing, and access. So while MFN may sound like a US policy, its implications are global. And that leads us to the key questions of today. What does this actually mean for our region here in the Nordics? And how should we react to this? And before diving into how we should react, I will start taking you back a year, because speed of change is critical. So back in May 2025, that was where it all started. Trump signed an executive order directed to the US Department to implement MFN pricing. And that meant that the US would start benchmarking prices against other developed countries. Then during the summer, we saw the first pressure being put on the pharma industry. Letters were sent out to 17 different companies, essentially demanding them to align the US prices with international price levels. And that's important because this is where MFN is not just being used as a regulatory tool, but also being used in the negotiation and pressure on the industry. And then we come to November, which is probably around the time where most people start hearing about MFN. And this is also where we see the first concrete implementation. A voluntary Medicaid model called Generous is introduced. And this model benchmarks US prices against international net prices, including countries like Denmark. And that's critical because that means that confidential or lower priced markets now directly influence US pricing. And in December, the model is expanded. 2 additional frameworks called Globe and Guard are proposed for Medicare. And this expansion has not been introduced yet, but it's set to be introduced later this year. And what's important to understand here is that there are many more countries in the reference basket, including Norway and Sweden. So in the late 2025, we see the industry is starting to respond. A number of pharmaceutical companies go into these voluntary agreements with the Trump administration. I say it with a little bit of sarcasm because I do not think that these agreements are voluntary. Companies that do not enter into these agreements, they are subject to tariffs or trade measures. They face great regulatory pressure, and importantly, they're more exposed in the mandatory MFN models like Globe and Guard. Whereas companies that do enter into these agreements, they receive exemptions from further pharmaceutical tariffs. They gain priority in the regulatory assessment, and their market access thereby become much more predictable. And then finally, we come to 2026, which is where we are now, and we see some of the real consequences starting to take effect in the Nordics. We're seeing delayed launches, we're seeing increased uncertainties, we're seeing pressure being put on, and we're seeing tariffs increased, and we're seeing Denmark and Sweden setting down MFN task forces, and we are seeing the industry starting to react to this. And this means that MFN is now becoming real. Because now MFN has moved from this policy mechanism into reality. And we are already seeing a chain reaction. First, we see this rising uncertainty. Affiliates are experiencing less predictability in both prices and access decisions. Planning is becoming very complex, and it's less certain, and this uncertainty has created stillstand. And we also see companies starting delaying launches. They need to wait before entering into these lower priced markets. They need to assess the risks of entering into these markets. And in some cases, we actually see that they decide to have no launch at all. And finally, we see market withdrawals. That's in the more extreme cases, but we've seen a well-known example with Repatha in Denmark that was being pulled off the market in February. So what starts as uncertainty is now already translating into real-time decisions. And that's the key point. MFN is already influencing decisions before it's even fully implemented. And besides consequences directly related to pricing, we also see a lot of pressure being put on the system, the access system, the healthcare system. And we also see effects on the broader ecosystem. Because let's say that the Nordics are being seen as a less attractive market to launch in. Well, that could potentially influence the willingness to play clinical trials here. So again, this is not just about price levels, it's also about how the entire system is starting to shift. We are starting to see that the industry is reacting, and this is probably what we all want to hear about today, like where do we start? Because where does all of this leave us? I will say one thing that we know is that MFN is not going away. So doing nothing or waiting for someone else to do something, that's not a strategy. So we need to start shifting our focus from being reactive to being more proactive. And first, I want to deep dive into scenario planning, because you need to prepare for different launch and pricing scenarios, rather than relying on a single plan. Timing, sequences, and access pathway, they might change. So let's say that you have a new drug coming on market. Let's call it drug X. It's an oncology product and it's set to launch next year. I see 3 scenarios for these drugs. There is the first scenario, you will launch as planned. The second one, your launch is delayed. Or the third one, that there will be no launch at all. So what do? If you see the first scenario, you launch as planned. This is like, you need to do the usuals, but you need to do it probably much earlier than you used to. So you need to assess the global price corridor before launch. Is the global price strategy feasible within your local market? And if not, are there alternative agreements that you can look into? Or can you define different target population? Let's say you have an ideal population, you have a subpopulation, then you maybe have like the most critical severe patient. And are there different solutions for different populations? And then you need to look into data. Is your clinical data enough? Or do we need further data to get the right value perception at the payers? And then you also need to start preparing your negotiation material. And this needs to be prepared early. You need to engage with your external stakeholders early to stress the value and differentiation in your HTA dialogue. Then we come to scenario 2. Your product X is being delayed. What do you do? And this is for me, and first of all, an internal exercise where you need to build a business case for being a launch-ready market. So you need to engage with your internal stakeholders trying to build this business case and provide like an access versus pricing risk case. But you also need to engage early with your authorities to manage expectations and see if they're interested in like alternative pricing agreements. You could also engage with clinicians because it's important to understand their perception of the area and also their perception and needs within this specific disease. And then you need to start to prepare your interim access solutions, for example, early access programs. And I will say that this is the time to think creatively about access and new ways of getting on market, because it might be needed and it might be possible due to the geopolitical circumstances that we see. And then we go to the third scenario, which is a no launch scenario, and which is what I call the policy track. Because while you cannot launch, you need to put pressure on your political landscape, and you need to engage with policymakers to ensure that they understand these long-term consequences of not being able to launch in your market. And obviously, there's also an internal track here, where you need to keep documenting and escalating access pathway and present that to your internal stakeholders. Then we come to pricing and portfolio. And for me, this is where you look at your pipeline and you start thinking about what are the products that we have in pipeline that are high risk for being referenced in the US. So this is probably an exercise that will need to be done together with your global headquarters, but it's also a local exercise in order to understand what are the high value products, what are the products with a broad global launch plan, and products that will likely be included in this benchmarking model. And then you need to build the business case. You need to build a business case for a Nordic launch. So why should the company launch in the Nordics? What is it that makes Nordic an attractive place? And here I think it's important to highlight the non-price values of the Nordics. For example, the health data, the real-world evidence that we have available that could potentially be used in alternative pricing agreements, the clinical trials and the innovative life sciences that we have, and then also that we have a good dialogue, I would say, with our authorities. And while you work on building an internal business case for being a launch market, you also need to engage externally to ensure that the system, the authorities, the clinicians, that they all understand the potential consequences that this will have for patients. And then you need to work together on positioning the Nordics. And finally, I will go to the contracting and negotiation. This is where you look at your existing portfolio, so what's already on market. And you review your current contracts and make sure that if they're not built for the uncertainty, and if there's no flexibility within these contracts, how can you build that into future contracts? So let's say you have a product on market, you have a contract on it, and your contract ends, let's say, the end of this year. And you're happy about the contract. So one thing is that you could reach out to some of the payers trying to see if there were options for prolonging the contract so that you didn't have to negotiate a new price right now. And you could also try and seek out if there were potential alternative contracting options that could be viable here. And keep in mind that these drugs, they've been on market for some time. So there might be some relevant evidence that could be included and that could potentially justify a higher price. For example, if there were long-term benefits or dynamic effects related to this treatment. It could also be that you could use real-world evidence in an alternative contracting scheme. But I will say across all of these three, we need to move away from these fixed plans to very agile operations. And it's not something I'll say that companies can just solve on their own. This is also a system change, and MFN sheds lights on some of the barriers we have with the system right now. And it requires internal alignment, but also external engagement. But if you can take one thing away from today, it is that there is something you can do. And the first question you will start asking yourself is where am I today on this journey? And what is the biggest challenge that I'm facing right now? And then start there, I would say. That's my best advice.
So what I'm hearing with launch planning is that it's not a fixed, static planning. So it needs to be reconsidered, reiterated, probably a little more scrummy than how we usually work with clients on launch planning.
Yeah, I will say obviously many companies have always had scenario thinking implemented into their launch planning, but it's just stressed important that we cannot have an easy win anymore. You need to prepare for every launch thoroughly. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for these localized insights, Lena. Very very interesting, very exciting stuff. I think that there's something to do. So summing up what I have heard, it sounds like the overall story is quite clear. So the US is redefining pricing through power and policy. To this end, we need to know that MFN is not new and is probably here to stay, and its consequences, repercussions. And second, Europe is adapting and not leading. In this context, doing nothing or waiting is not a viable strategy. And companies, probably especially local affiliates, need to start being more proactive rather than reactive in their planning. And then the third point I've heard is that the Nordics are highly exposed as a region. To react in this context, you companies need to start developing more flexible launch plans, prepare early for pipeline products, and ensure your current contracts are suitable in a world that's ruled by the MFN framework. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I would say you captured most of it, yeah.
So the real question is not, will MFN impact you and us? It is how to stay relevant in a world where prices are no longer confidential, no longer local, but able to stay local. So there is a question, and I'll look into that. So I was just testing the chat because there was silence in there. but it looks like it's working. But I've been going with a question for some time I'd like to pose to you. My impression is that MFN is not as top of mind with our Swedish and Norwegian clients as with our Danish clients. Are these two markets, and maybe the Finnish market as well, but are they less or differently impacted than the Danish?
In some way, yeah, because the generous model that was introduced in November, that included Denmark as a reference country. So Norway and Sweden was not, and Finland was not included in that. And that's probably why we see a big pressure on Denmark right now, why everyone's talking about it here in Denmark. But I will say that Norway and Sweden can definitely not lean back and say, oh, phew, it's not on us, because this will also have effect on their prices. And especially once the two other frameworks that will be introduced later this year in the Medicare program will be introduced, because the reference basket is much broader and including countries like Sweden and Norway.
So there's a timeline issue, and then there's possibly something about impact, but it's going to have consequences. I
will say we do see also, especially the Swedes reacting right now. They are setting down the MFN task force. There are HTA bodies working around the MFN agenda, and so we are seeing them proactively actually taking some initiatives right now, and I think that's very important. And I'm hoping that Norway will follow as well, because this is important, and this is not something that's going away tomorrow.
And that's a great segue to this question that came up in the chat that I'm going to read out loud now. Lene, do you see willingness from the national task forces in Sweden and Denmark to engage in more agile contracting? So the MFN task forces in Denmark and Sweden possibly will be established in Norway as well, but agile contracting, engaging in that conversation.
To be fair, we haven't seen much from these task forces yet, so it's difficult to know what exactly will come out of it. But I'm seeing a big pressure on the system in general, and I'm seeing a lot of pressure being also put on how can we try and have different types of contracts that allows us to have prices that are higher on paper. So it's definitely something that's happening right now, and whether it will end up being a broad acceptance of these agreements, or just I think there'll be more focus on it. I think that we can say for sure. Yeah, and there's probably a little bit more need for it now. So also from a system perspective. So I think this is the time also to try and introduce it into the systems. Yeah.
Great. So confidentiality in pricing is an issue that's come up also in input that we have had in preparation for this webinar. So from a company perspective, is there anything that these companies can do to avoid confidential prices to be subject of MFN referencing? Is there alternative agreement possibilities with a cap, something like that?
I will say it's very difficult to answer that because I think it will be very individually for company to company. Many companies have entered into different types of agreements with the Trump administration, and we don't know for sure what each of these says. So they might be less focused on some products because they already made an agreement with the administration. But I will say that alternative agreement is probably one of the tools that we need to use much more in the future in order to avoid I think you cannot avoid this price for being referenced, but in order to to showcase higher prices, but in reality it's not as high as seen on paper. So definitely some sort of alternative agreements will need to be introduced.
But there will be, on a general scale, much more transparency.
I think it's been a problem for multiple decades around these high prices in the US, and it's also due to a flaw within the US system. And that's why previous administrations have tried to address the issue within the system. But now that it's being broadened up and being used in a trade, with trade mechanisms like tariffs as well, I think it will not change, not even when the Trump administration is not here anymore. I think international price referencing, that's part of the future.
And another input from the chat, how willing are authorities to allow price increases in order to keep the Nordic market attractive for new product launches under MFN policies?
That's a good question. How willing they are to increase prices? I think many of the different governments right now are looking to short-term solutions and long-term solutions. And some of the short-term solutions might be that prices will need to increase. And then we need to manage to figure out a more sustainable long-term. But I think if we look far out in the future, I think we'll see a world where prices in the US will probably go down and prices in Europe will probably go up. Because the gap between the prices in the US and the rest of the world, it's become very, very difficult to justify the high price level there. So one way or another, I think we will see broad price changes. How exactly the government will solve this and how willing that they are to invest in this, that's difficult to answer. But we are seeing more willingness, and we are seeing the governments understanding that this is something they need to be concerned about and need to deal with.
But authorities here is also the HTA bodies, so the well-known ones in the Nordics. It doesn't seem like they are willing to spend anything at the moment.
Well, yeah, and that's why I say governments, not HTA, because I think it is driven by the government. It needs to be allowed more funding and more investment into the life science sector in general in order to be able to justify these higher price levels. But exactly what will happen, that's difficult to know, but we'll see.
So along these lines, a question that came in earlier, so does MFN impact access of innovative medicines, specifically for patients in Denmark and the Nordic countries? So new launches of innovative medicines?
Yeah, the short answer is it does affect launches, and that's because it is difficult to launch right now because of this uncertainty, and it is creating still standard. I will actually say that the biggest challenge right now is the still standard it's creating within the companies around. So I'm hoping that if people take something away from this today, is that they need to be more proactive, and that there is something that can be done even on the local affiliate level. Because this still standard is just creating more and more uncertainty, and is not beneficial for the system, the patients, the companies. Yeah.
So thank you for concluding this, Line. Any follow-up questions we can take via email, please address that to us. So thank you for sharing your questions, your thoughts. And thank you, Line, for enlightening us.
You're welcome.